Today I'm going to give you an introduction to atlas.ti Cloud Beta, which is a web-based software that can be used for coding and analyzing qualitative data. And so the first thing we need to start off doing here is signing up for an account. So let's go ahead and do that. And so we can use whatever name we'd like, an email address, as well as create a password for ourselves. And so we're going to be presented with this tutorial, but I'm going to head and click Close Tour and show you around this software myself. So there's a couple things to notice here in the dashboard area. There's this Create a New Project button, and then there's this Demo Interview Project, which is where I'm going to start us off today. So I'm going to click into this. And there's a couple things that I want us to notice. So currently we can see here that we're in the Documents tab over on the left, and we can see that there's been some interviews that have kind of already been pre-uploaded here for us to look at and experiment with. And then there's the Codes tab below that, the Memos tab, and the Quotations tab. I find that I spend most of my time in the Documents, Codes, and Quotations tab, and the Memos tab is good if you'd like to write yourself some research notes, but it's in these three areas where most of the research, coding, and analysis has been happening in my experience. So instead of looking at these documents right away, the first thing I'd like to actually start us off with is creating some codes for ourselves. So let's click into this Codes tab. And we can see that this area has already been pre-populated with a number of different codes that they have created for this demo interview project. But I'd like for us to create some of our own codes to use for coding the interview. So I'm going to click on this red button in the upper right-hand corner called Create Code. And we're presented here with this dialog box, and I'm going to call this our first code. And we can add a description if we like. And then we can choose whatever color we'd like to kind of visually distinguish this code from others. So I'm going to choose this nice lime green code and create new code. You can see if we scroll down a bit that we can now see that our code is residing amongst all of the other codes that have been created here. And so let's create another code. So I'm going to hit Create Code, and I'm going to create our second code. We can add a description. And I'm going to use this nice purple color for this new code. So we can now see that we've created a couple of codes. So let's go over to our documents and figure out how we can actually use these codes to analyze some data or code some data in our documents. So let's head over to Documents on the left side. And let's start off with this first interview here. And so there's a couple things we can notice about this document already. It looks like it's already been coded, and if we hover over some of these highlighted areas, we can see that they're attached to particular codes on the side. And so these are what atlas.ti calls quotations, and quotations are attached to one or more particular codes. And the way that coding works in this software is that you highlight a particular area of text, and you're presented with this little box over on the side that says add code to quotation, add comment to quotation, and then create quotation. So if we click into this area, we're presented with a list of all of the different codes that we have created over in our Codes tab. So I'm going to say that this quotation that I've just highlighted is part of our first code. I'd like to label it as that. And so I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to hit Create Quotation. And then we'll see that atlas.ti now says this piece of text now belongs to our first code. And so I can go through the document and see whatever I think belongs in our first code and create quotations as I go through it. I can also do the same for the second code that we've created. So I can highlight a portion, I can click into this box and select our second code and create some quotations that I think belong in the our second code category. And so now that I have a number of different codes that I've created that are residing within our first code and our second code categories, say that I'd like to go back and look at the quotations that I've added into these categories in a more organized fashion. And this is where the Quotations tab comes in. So let's head over to the left to the Quotations area. There's a couple of things to notice here, and the main thing is that there's some already pre-populated filters that have been added to this project demo. But what we need to do is create a new filter, so add a new filter so that we can assign the codes that we just created into these filters. So I'm going to add a new filter, and we can call it whatever we want, but if I'm wanting to look at data that I've just categorized as our first code, I'm going to call it something that reminds me of that. So I'm going to call it our first code. And to create it, I'm going to hit this plus. And so now we see that we've created our first code, and we can see that we're in kind of like the our first code dashboard area. But we can see that these aren't all of the codes that we want. This is literally every code or every quotation that has been coded. We can see that there's some stuff in here that we've made, but this is not what we want. So we actually have to add a rule to this filter in order to filter everything else out and just get stuff that we've tagged as our first code. So we're going to hit add rule, and because we want this to be related to a particular code, we're going to click code. Then we can leave this as has any of, and we can select the codes that we want to appear in this filter. So I'm going to scroll through here until I find our first code and check this box. And now we can see that our dashboard area has been populated with all of the codes or all of the quotations that we coded as belonging to our first code. And so we can do a similar thing for our second code. So we can hit add new filter, name it something that reminds us of our second code. And then similarly, we're going to have to add a rule that has to do with a code, and then select our second code. And similarly, we can see here that we can now see all of the different quotations from that interview that we coded as our second code. And this is a really useful tool for just being able to see all of your data at once and kind of go and look among this data as you're analyzing it. Another feature that I really like about atlas.ti is that as you're coding different documents, it's going to update this filter area as you're kind of taking these codes and applying them to new transcripts or other qualitative data. So if we go back to the documents area, for instance, I've already coded this interview, but let's say that I want to code this new transcript, this new interview, but I want to use the same codes. So all I have to do is go into this document and do what I've been doing before. So I can highlight an area, click into this box, add it to the code that we've already created. And now these codes also exist in this document. So when I go over back into the quotations tab and click into my filters, I can see that our first code has been updated with the quotations from the particular interview that I just analyzed, in addition to all of the codes that I already created or I already added to the other interviews. So this is a really useful piece of the software that I think helps visualize and organize your data across the different documents that you're working in. Another thing that I'd like to show you how to do today is how to create your own project, upload your own data, and begin showing you how you can create codes as you're actually analyzing your data. So we're here back on the atlas.ti dashboard, and instead of looking at this interview project again, what I'd like us to do is click Create a New Project. And we're presented with this pop-up where we can name our project and add a description. And as usual, we can pick our color, so I'm just going to click pink and hit Create New Project. And so now you can see here we've been notified that this new project has been created, and we find ourselves again in the Documents tab, but this time there's no document. So if we click this Add New Document button, what's going to happen is we'll be taken to a screen where we can kind of begin typing in the document manually ourselves. But I think for a lot of the research that we do as person-based qualitative research or even quantitative research, we already kind of have documents. We have Word documents or we have PDFs that we would like to upload. So if you click this little down arrow over here, you can see that we can upload a Word document or we can upload a PDF document. So I'm going to upload an example Word document from Downloads. And so now we can see here that we have this user interview example document. And what I'd like to do now is show you how you can upload a document and then kind of simultaneously be looking at your data and analyzing it and creating codes. So I'm going to just pick an example here, and let's say I'm looking through this document. Like I said, it's a user interview. And so let's say that I've identified this as an example of a frustration that this person was involved in. So I'm going to call this frustration with web experience. And you can see down here, because I don't have any codes created, it's giving me the option to create a new code. So if I click this, we can see that I have created a code at the same time that I'm coding my data. And I can keep doing this, so I can click in here and this code has already been created, so I can continue to add to this code, or I can create new codes. as I'm kind of going through and analyzing my data. And of course, this works the same as the rest of the examples you've seen. So if we go over to codes, we can see that we have our codes. And if we were to go into quotations, we would be able to create new filters and kind of add our codes or do whatever we would like in order to filter and analyze our data. On behalf of the Digital Rhetoric Collaborative, this has been a brief introduction to the web-based analysis software atlas.ti Cloud beta version. So in this video, we learned some of the basic functionalities of the software, as well as how to upload your own data and begin analyzing and coding as you go.